Okay, Randy has a request. What is the request?
Mute your mic if you're joining via the phone.
If you're joining via your cell phone, can you mute your phone when you're not speaking, please? Okay, got it. Okay. I'd like to call to order today's meeting, the Executive Branch Audit Committee for 2/22/22. I got to say that. At 1 p.m. Could I ask the clerk to take the roll, please?
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor Kano Burkhead.
Here.
Secretary Sagaski.
Here.
Treasurer Conine.
Here.
Controller Byrne.
Here.
General Ford.
Here.
Public Member DeLong.
Here.
Governor Sisolak.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Warren. Appreciate it. Close item number 1. Item number 2, public comment. This is the first time set aside for public comment. Anyone wishing to address the board on any item on today's agenda, items on the agenda, please step forward, identify yourself for the record. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Do we have anybody in Las Vegas for public comment? No. Do I have anybody in Carson City for public comment?
No one here, Governor.
Great. Do we have any written or electronic public comment?
No, Governor.
Okay. I'll close public comment and move on to item number 3, approval of the October 26th meeting minutes. Do we have a motion regarding the minutes?
Governor, I have 3 questions before you ask for that. This is Barbara Sagaski, Secretary of State.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, just 2 questions. But I wanted to know about the salary study. We did not get a copy of that, and so I would just like something on the one-page salary comparable study comparing DPS salaries and other agencies. And then the last one was the item 5C, or I'm sorry, 6C. Did STWD ever come up with a definition of construction projects in SAM to have full implementation of the recommendations to formally define construction contracts? And so those are my 2 questions, and I can have them get back to you whenever. It's fine. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Director?
Governor, this is Warren Lohman. For the record, we'll reach out and get answers to those and distribute those to committee members.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any further questions about the minutes? Do I have a motion on the minutes?
So moved.
I don't know who made the motion, but we have a motion on the minutes. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. When you make a motion, since we have a,
I'm also abstaining.
okay, wait, I got 2 abstentions. Lieutenant Governor is abstaining. She was not part of this committee at the time, and the Attorney General is abstaining. He was not here at the time. When a motion is made, could the maker of the motion please identify themselves so the clerk can get an accurate record here, please? And then moving on to item number 4, presentation of audit reports pursuant to NRS 353A.085.
Good afternoon, Governor and committee members. Beatrice Mena-Ortiz for the record. HHS Deputy Director Marla McDade-Williams and the administrators of the Healthcare Financing and Policy, Welfare and Supportive Services, and Public and Behavioral Health Divisions are here to represent the department. The audit focused on HHS's provision of transportation services to Nevadans enrolled in one or more public assistance program. The objective was to develop recommendations to improve transportation services. Research shows one of the greatest barriers to accessing nutritious food is transportation. Lack of transportation limits food choices and increases food insecurity. Existing public assistance programs offer transportation services for limited purposes. HHS could expand transportation services offered through its public assistance programs to reduce food insecurity overall in Nevada and reduce Medicaid program costs up to $2,000 annually for each food insecure individual participating in the program. We make two recommendations for HHS to improve transportation services. The department should improve management of transportation services and expand transportation services offered to Nevadans. First, we recommend HHS improve management of transportation services to increase program efficiencies and access to food. HHS can achieve efficiencies through consistent practices across the department, actively managing service contracts, understanding the true cost of transportation, and ensuring participants receive consistent services. Our review revealed HHS does not know the actual cost of providing transportation services through its transportation broker, MTM. HHS pays MTM based on a $2.29 per member per month flat rate, regardless of actual transportation use. This amounts to $81.5 million in contracted services over the 4-year contract term. Consequently, MTM financially benefits if actual costs are less than contracted rates. Understanding the actual cost of providing transportation services can help HHS manage current costs and provide data necessary to expand transportation services for Nevadans where transportation continues to be a barrier to affordable and nutritious food. Second, we recommend HHS expand transportation services offered to Nevadans by conducting a detailed review of existing programs, coordinating with other state and local agencies, and updating the state food security plan to reflect expanded services. Expanding transportation services will increase access to affordable and nutritious food for individuals living in food deserts or food insecure households. Food insecurity affects children, minorities, and people of color to a greater degree. Adults in food insecure households were 15% more likely to have a chronic illness, and food insecure children are more at risk for developmental disabilities. Medical costs for food insecure individuals can be up to $2,000 greater per year than for people who have greater access to food. Nevada's food insecurity rate is 30% higher than the national average. The state's food security plan addresses food insecurity through availability and affordability, but does not address transportation. In summary, improving transportation services will provide expanded options and increase access to transportation for food insecure households and households located in food deserts, and could reduce state Medicaid program costs through improved help. We'd like to thank HHS management and staff for their time and input throughout the audit. We'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have at this time.
Do we have any questions from any of the board members?
Yes, Governor, this is Barbara Sagowski, Secretary of State.
Yes, Secretary, go ahead.
Thank you. I am concerned about this arena, and the reason is I think was stated by the audit committee, and thank you very much for answering our questions, what you could, because of not being able to get all of the information from the agencies. I don't know that this is being monitored very well, and I'm concerned about that. We don't know the cost of the passes. We don't know who distributes them, how they're distributed. Is the money being spent well? $20.4 million. And, you know, that comes from the taxpayers. So I have some real issues with what's going on and would really appreciate some of the answers we gave to the audit committee. They tried to do what they could from the information they got. But I would really like to have some more in-depth questions answered, and I think we sent them in, so maybe we can get that and have it ready for the next meeting. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Secretary. Does staff want to answer any of that now, or do you want to just have a written response?
Good afternoon. For the record, Marla McDade-Williams, Deputy Director of Programs for the Department of Health and Human Services. In the interest of time, we'll be happy to answer that provide further information to answer those questions.
Okay. Do we have any further questions from the committee? Seeing and hearing none. Okay. Purchasing, you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon, Governor and members of the committee. For the record, Craig Stevenson. Here to represent the Purchasing Division is Administrator Kevin Doty. We conducted an audit of contracts that were solicited by the Purchasing Division, then managed by agency staff once awarded. The audit focused on increasing transparency of agency contracts, enhancing post-award contract management, and ensuring state agencies follow procurement guidelines. To improve the contract monitoring process, we made 2 recommendations. First, we recommend the Purchasing Division expand post-award contract management training. Agency contract management staff are not adequately trained to ensure contracts are effectively managed once awarded to a vendor. The lack of training was evident in fiscal year 2021 as agency staff failed to resolicit 14% of contracts reviewed prior to expiration. Failure by agency staff to timely resolicit contracts resulted in unnecessary contract extensions and duplication of effort by the Purchasing Division and the Governor's Finance Office. We estimate 371 hours of staff time was expended reviewing and approving these contract extensions in fiscal year 2021. Failure to timely resolicit contracts resulted in an agency providing essential food services for 2 months under an expired contract before the contract was retroactively extended. Failure by agencies to timely resolicit contracts forces the Purchasing Division and the Governor's Finance Office to choose between approving a contract extension or risk denying services essential to agency operations and Nevadans. Second, we recommend the Purchasing Division establish oversight of purchasing-led agency contracts. The Purchasing Division does not currently provide oversight of agency-managed contracts once the contract is awarded. As a result, 36% of contracts reviewed in fiscal year 2021 had either post-award compliance issues or were not resolicited within the original contract term. The National Association of State Procurement Officials recommends oversight of agency contracts by state central procurement offices. Oversight of agency contracts can be achieved through a minimal effort by the Purchasing Division to periodically monitor these contracts for compliance with guidelines and to ensure that purchasing-led agency contracts due to expire are resolicited timely. We would like to thank the Purchasing Division's management and staff for their time and input throughout the audit, and we'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have at this time.
Do we have any
Governor,
questions? Go ahead.
Yes, Governor, this is Barbara Sagatsky, Secretary of State. The questions that I have to do with, I've just been hearing about the food deserts and the food insecure households. Those I've known about. The food desert I hadn't heard much about. But where do they take them? I mean, are they taking them to the store? Are they taking them to a place to eat that the food's already prepared? That I didn't see, and I don't know where that is. And then my other question, which we have many, but the other question is, the census showed that 1 in 4 Nevadans are enrolled in one or more public assistance programs, and we just wondered how accurate that was, and what is considered a public assistance program. I don't have that determination or that terminology. So those are just a few of the questions. I have more, but those are just a few. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Secretary of State, this is Warren Lohman for the record. We've got your questions. We will forward those to the department and follow up to make sure that you get the answers that you'd like. This audit on the contract monitoring, unless you have questions about that, we'll wrap up all of your concerns with the initial audit and get you answers.
Thank you, Warren. I really appreciate it. I know you tried to answer a lot of our questions, and we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Warren,
you,
if you,
Governor.
thank you, Secretary. Warren, if you could copy all the committee members on those responses, please.
Yes, Governor, will do.
Okay, do we have any further questions from the committee on this audit? Purchasing.
This is Trudy DeLong.
Go ahead.
Okay, this is Trudy DeLong, public member. I was just curious on the contract audit. Are some of these issues related to not being able to secure qualified personnel? Are there any shortages in the division, and that's why some of these things can't be done?
Ma'am, I would direct that question to Kevin Doty, the Administrator of the Purchasing Division.
For the record, Kevin Doty, Administrator, State Purchasing. The lack of compliance by agencies when it comes to managing their contracts may very well be impacted by the fact there are so many vacancies at the agencies. Fortunately, from State Purchasing's perspective, we don't have a lot of vacancies. We have 25 approved positions and 24 staff are in those positions right now. So we're quite fortunate, and we support the findings in this audit, and we will take on the extra work involved in monitoring agencies as they manage the contracts that we put in place for them.
Okay, thank you very much.
General Ford.
Thank you. Listen, I just wanted to note that in addition to the contracts being ratified retroactively, having an impact on the governor's office and the GFO, oftentimes it also has an impact on the Board of Examiners when the contracts are presented to us for consideration as well. So, I just want to kind of highlight that fact as well, that it goes well beyond, those two items that were mentioned, and wanted to make note of that so that we can ensure that we give the Board of Examiners an appropriate amount of opportunity to vet contracts without having to feel as though we're under the gun to retroactively approve a contract based on the issues that were raised in the audit here.
Is there a response? Mr. Doty?
Kevin Doty, for the record, I agree completely with General Ford. I'm also someone who's put under the gun when agencies let contracts expire and they come running to me asking for emergency approvals and various solicitation waivers. And so the failure to timely begin the process to renew a contract causes problems for purchasing, it causes problems for the governor's finance office, and it causes problems for the BOE. And there's really no good justification for it. If you recall last fall, the BOE approved the largest contracts in the history of the state of Nevada, the $11 billion Medicaid contracts. And those were done the way contract renewals should be done. Suzanne Bierman over at HICFAB contacted me 3 years in advance. We had a meeting, we had a consultant in place to help write the RFP. We ran the entire process the way it should be run, and the contracts were put in place months before they were going to expire. So if the most expensive and most complicated contracts the state enters into can be done ahead of schedule, there's really no excuse for the rest of our contracts not being done on time.
If you could make that clear to all of our agencies, it would certainly be helpful. Okay, any more questions on this one?
This is Catherine Burns, State Controller. I have a question for Mr. Doty. Do you have, can you get a list together for us of which agencies are chronically late? Do you have any that are chronically late?
Kevin Doty, for the record. Yes, I mean, it's a problem that exists across a lot of agencies to a certain extent. Some agencies have had more problems than others, and it kind of goes in trends. Department of Corrections has had a lot of problems lately. I think they've lost almost their entire contracting staff, and a lot of things got dropped in that. So some of it goes to staffing issues. But yeah, it is something we can look at going forward. We've talked about potentially compiling a list of agencies that fail to properly manage contracts, and that could be an item either for this committee to look at, potentially an item for the Board of Examiners to look at. It could be an agenda item for the BOE, if the BOE is interested in, along with approving contracts, seeing a list of agencies that have failed to properly manage contracts.
I think that would be helpful if you provided both to this committee and the BOE. It would be beneficial, Mr. Doty. Any more questions? And we can get that on the next BOE agenda, it would be helpful. Okay, moving on to Department of Corrections, Fiscal Processes 2.
Good
Good afternoon, Governor and members of the committee. For the record, Maria Moreno, representing the Nevada Department of Corrections, or NDOC, our Director Charles Daniels and his leadership team. This audit was the second audit focusing on NDOC's fiscal processes. The objective was to develop recommendations to improve oversight of fiscal management and accounting practices. We found diminished oversight resulted in reduced transparency over $14.2 million in offender store fund sales, unregulated assessments charged to offender accounts, excessive overtime and standby pay for director's office employees, inappropriate assignment of state vehicles to employees, inaccurate reporting of vehicle use, and decreased transparency and inaccurate accounting for weapons purchases. We made 4 recommendations for NDOC to improve oversight of fiscal management and accounting practices. First, we recommend NDOC develop offender store fund markup limits and incorporate methodology into legislatively approved regulations adopted through the public rulemaking process to increase transparency and conformance with statutory authority and legislative intent for an average of $14.2 million in annual sales. Documenting markup limits and incorporating methodology into legislatively approved regulations will help ensure offenders can purchase basic necessities at a reasonable cost. NDOC does not have documented criteria or legislatively approved regulations defining what constitutes a reasonable markup for goods sold to offenders and visitors. A previous audit conducted by the Division of Internal Audits found offender store fund expenditures were not administered through legislatively approved regulations. To date, NDOC still has not adopted offender store fund regulations through the public rulemaking process as required by statute and recommended by the audit. Second, we recommend NDOC increase oversight of the prisoner's personal property fund by adopting regulations through the public administrative rulemaking process for deductions from offender accounts. Additionally, NDOC needs to determine a reasonable medical copay fee and assessment rates charged to offenders. These charges may significantly reduce amounts in offenders' accounts available to purchase basic necessities, affecting disadvantaged offenders the most. Prior to July 2021, NDOC deducted up to 80% of deposits made to offenders' accounts for restitution payments and other assessments. SB 22 of the 2021 legislative session implemented caps on assessments and requires NDOC to administer them through regulations adopted through the public rulemaking process. NDOC has not yet complied with this requirement. NDOC can increase oversight of the fund by adopting regulations through the public rulemaking process and ensure assessments charged to offenders' accounts are reasonable and conform with statutory authority and legislative intent. Third, we recommend NDOC improve administrative accountability to reduce use of state resources. Reducing the use of state resources will help ensure state requirements are followed and fiscal reporting is accurate. Director's office employees were paid excessive overtime and standby pay, often associated with travel and internal events with accumulated hours inconsistent with the nature of position duties. 2 previous DIA audits found NDOC incurred excessive overtime and standby pay due to inadequate oversight of personnel and payroll practices. NDOC has not yet implemented the audit recommendations to improve oversight of overtime. In addition, NDOC inappropriately assigns state-owned vehicles to director's office management staff, regardless of need or actual use, and inaccurately reports vehicle use. Vehicle use for 61% of employees assigned a vehicle did not meet the state's minimum usage requirements. Finally, we recommend NDOC improve oversight over weapons purchases by ensuring purchases are not classified as inmate-driven costs and are accounted for at facilities where weapons will be used. Improving accountability over weapons purchases will increase transparency in operations and improve accuracy of accounting expenditures and records. Improper accounting misstates costs and obscures the purpose of the purchases. We noted 40% of weapons purchases were charged to inmate-driven accounts and to inmate transportation during a time when the offender population was declining. In addition, NDOC charged weapon purchases designated for use at other facilities and locations to the director's office. In summary, improving oversight of fiscal management and accounting practices will increase oversight over $14.3 million annually in overtime costs and offender store sales, increase transparency in the administrative rulemaking process, ensure offenders can purchase basic necessities at a reasonable cost, and improve administrative accountability in the Director's Office. We appreciate the Department of Corrections' assistance throughout our audit. We would be happy to answer any questions the committee may have at this time.
Okay, where do we want to start on this one? Who?
This is Barbara Zagowski, and whenever you're ready.
Go ahead.
Okay, I've got kind of a list, so I know that, Warren, thank you. You have my list of questions. And I wanted to thank you for that it is going to be a public hearing process for the oversight of the offenders store. So I thank you for that. I have some questions on item 3, recommendation 3. This one really kind of is interesting because the staff that has 43% of the overtime is the Director's Office, and we haven't had any explanation as to why that is. And then we have work vehicles. Now, everybody, from my estimation, has asked for a work vehicle, and they do take some home. And so I'm just curious if they're used just for transportation to and from home. Where else would the vehicles be stored? Is it work-related? Do they get used for anything else? That's one of the questions. And then another question would be, hang on just a minute, bear with me. Recommendation 4. And I know that the weapons, this is something that we're very in tune to at the Secretary of State's office, and it's unclear about the director is the one that approves the weapon purchases, and so does he know exactly what's needed by each of the correctional officers, and do they take the weapons with them when they leave? Or do they leave them and they're repurposed? They're given to somebody else. Those are some of the questions that I have, and I have a list of others that are on there as well. And so I know Warren has a copy of that. But those are some of the questions that I have right now. So thank you.
Director Daniels, you want to go on that?
Yes, I'm ready to go. Good
Put
afternoon.
your microphone on.
I'm sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Charles Daniels, and I'm the Director of the Nevada Department of Corrections. Secretary of State Zagowski, in response to your question regarding number 3, the recommendation was improve administrative accountability to reduce use of state resources. The Director's Office overtime will be reviewed and approved when the overtime is warranted and cannot be completed within the employee's normal work week schedule. Staff shortages and short deadlines given by other agencies can place a burden upon the department mandating overtime be used to accomplish tasks. A review of the administrative regulation AR 326, which is posting of shift/overtime, will be completed to reflect this update in procedures. Since the audit, the employees currently receiving standby pay are within the Office of the Inspector General, who are responsible for communicating with institutions and responding to qualifying events 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The Director's Office will commit to completing an audit of standby pay on a quarterly basis, as well as including language to address standby pay within Administrative Regulation AR 326, which is posting of shifts and overtime. The Director's Office will review the Nevada Administrative Code in detail. Forms DOC 4512, which is W-2 information sheet, home storage of vehicles, and Form DOC 4513, which is vehicle information sheet, will be evaluated for updates and changes. All DOC 4512s and DOC 4513 forms will be resubmitted for each vehicle. COVID dramatically changed the manner in which we operated. An executive team was established, and as a team, we traveled to each major facility to meet with staff individually, to also conduct town halls for all staff as well as inmates and offenders, and it was important to have a leadership team from each discipline and leadership from each gender available to answer questions and address concerns. Furthermore, with limited air travel available, this resulted in more frequent trips via state vehicles. These trips can result in upwards of 10 hours of travel time solely. That, in addition to the entire executive team travel, resulted in an increase in travel costs and time. And I'm now going to transition into the vehicle assignments. I'm sorry, improve oversight over weapons purchases. What?
Talk about the vehicles.
That was it. Yeah. So,
Okay, wait, is there more here?
No.
And you're directing who's talking here, so do you have further to go, Director?
I had answered the question regarding the vehicles, and I noticed that Secretary of State Zagafsky has some questions regarding the oversight of weapons, and I'd like to address that.
Please.
All right. The Nevada Department of Corrections will ensure the Ordinance Committee, consisting of 4 wardens and the Deputy Director of Operations, will review weapons purchased throughout the Nevada Department of Corrections. This will need to be submitted for inclusion to Administrative Regulation 412 at the next revision. In terms of the question that was specific about, do I know what weapons we need? Absolutely. I know what weapons we need, how many we need, the type, and what their utilization is for. And I'd be more than happy to go into detail of each and every one of those. However, as it relates to the purchasing and the budgeting of it, I would like to turn this over to Deputy Director Bill Gitter, who's our Deputy Director of Operations, who will go into the specifics.
Good afternoon, Governor, distinguished members of the committee. For the record, my name is Bill Gitter. I'm the Deputy Director of Operations for the Nevada Department of Corrections. Currently, weapons purchases throughout the department are addressed from each budget appointing authority, that would be the wardens of the major facilities, and then processed up through our purchasing department and, of course, state purchasing. The purchase of weapons complies with those that are authorized under AR 412, and then the various operational procedures pursuant to each major institution and facility. In 2016, we transitioned from lethal weapons inside our facilities to solely less lethal weapons or less lethal tools to maintain the custody and control and safety of our inmates and staff. As we transition from lethal weapons inside our institutions, they don't exist inside our wire anymore. We had to purchase over the last 5 to 7 years enough less lethal protective gear, equipment, and weapons to maintain the safety and security of our inmates and staff. That has been spread out over time. And in addition to ending lethal weapons and then increasing our number of less lethal tools to maintain the safety of our inmates and staff, we also had to transition from one lethal weapon system to a less lethal weapon system that's comparable, from 40 caliber Glocks, our standard pistols are used outside the institutions, to 9mm pistols because they're less expensive to operate over time because the ammunition is much cheaper. So those two initiatives, purchasing less lethal tools to replace the lethal ones that we used to rely upon, and then transitioning to less expensive weapon systems, has cost the departments some dollars to do those things, but they're designed to afford a limited or as much freedom of movement for our inmates inside our institutions as possible, maintaining safety so that we can continue our programming efforts towards rehabilitation. If we simply lock those facilities down, and as the audit findings seem to suggest, rely on the overuse of restraints, we run into a case where that's not constitutionally viable, and it's not good over time because inmates that are treated that way unnecessarily over a long period of time do the exact opposite of rehabilitation. And we've learned that based on the DOJ's warning that the department was under review in 2015 and 2016. those changes were positively made, and I think the expenses since then have been efficient and justifiable.
I don't think that was a question though. Where are the weapons stored? What weapons are stored that are replacing these less lethal weapons? Are these beanbag? What are they?
40 millimeter launchers that shoot rubber projectile rounds.
Okay.
And those weapons are stored in the institutions, in the control rooms, ready for use.
Where are the lethal weapons that they did have stored now?
They're either in the arms room or they have been turned in or destroyed appropriately.
Okay, did that answer your question, Secretary?
The one question they haven't answered or responded to is what happens when somebody leaves the office? When somebody is no longer in that position, what happens to the weapon? Does it get reassessed to somebody new that comes in? What happens? Do they take it with them? I hadn't heard that response, but thank you for the responses. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Secretary Sagaski. Well, I'd like to take the first part. This is Bill Gitter again for the record. For our line officers, the less lethal tools that they carry, some are retained on their person and they are taken home. They're asp baton, they're marked for chemical dispenser. But the other weapon systems, for instance, the 40 millimeter grenade launcher that's used to protect inmates and staff inside the housing units, are left inside the institution for the next shift's use.
I don't think that's what she was asking.
No, I was asking about the actual weapon that they have on them that they carry with them. What happens to that weapon? Is it used again for somebody else? I mean, I understand about the big stuff you're talking about. I'm talking about, my officers in my office, carry handguns. Now, are those redone? Are they left with them? What do they do with them? That's my question to you.
Secretary Sagaski, this is James Jones, Inspector General for the record. My staff, Inspector General staff, transportation staff, and some other staff members take their firearms home with them. They're assigned to them. They're subject to recall at any time or on standby to respond to institutions, escapes or walkaways, things like that. Firearms that are used for transportation and things like that from the facilities will be turned in upon the completion of the transportation for the next shift to use for future transportation runs and things like that.
I don't think, again, you guys aren't answering questions.
You're still not getting it. Thank you, Governor.
Wait,
my question is,
I'm sorry.
you are given a gun, and you have that in your possession. What happens to it if you leave the position? Does the gun stay with you? Do you take it with you? What if they leave the state? They retire? They just don't stay. What happens to that gun? Do you give it to another person that's coming in their position? What happens to that gun?
James Jones, Inspector General for the record. When a employee leaves or retires or resigns from the Nevada Department of Corrections, they turn that firearm in and it is redistributed to the next person who replaces them in that position.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. General Ford.
Okay, I have several questions as well, but a preparatory comment first off. There's a lot of context to the report we're hearing right now that probably isn't being made known or has been forgotten. I was in the legislature for a number of years, and this overtime issue predates the current governor, predates the current administration, and predates the current legislature. I recall being in the legislature when the governor's predecessor had to come for emergency funds for overtime. So I have a little compassion for some of the concerns that are being raised in this audit and some of the responses that you give. To be sure, I have some concerns as well, and I'm going to discuss those, but I want to acknowledge some of the difficulties that I know the Department of Corrections has in the personnel context. We heard at the Board of Prison Commissioners meeting from one of your officers about personnel issues. I didn't have to speak up because I heard it and I know what he meant. And here we are hearing about overtime issues again. And I feel for you, but I want to say something. And I'm not trying to point fingers, but when our governor presents a budget that desires to improve personnel and resources, it's incumbent upon legislators from all over our state to accommodate that. We hear a lot of complaints about lack of personnel, a lot of complaints about overtime and whatnot, and I recall vividly hearing from some of my colleagues in the rural areas who simply did not want to accommodate budgetary requests to fulfill those responsibilities, Governor. And I think what's important for us to note is, as a matter of public record, we need to request that those who have concerns be willing to hit the green button when it comes to voting for a budget that has been requested that gives the personnel to the Department of Corrections that they need. That has to be said, and that is not something that I think has been said to this point, at least in this particular meeting. So I wanted to reiterate that. I also wanted to acknowledge something that may not be recalled relative to the transition from lethal to non-lethal weaponry. One of the first cases I had as Attorney General when I came in, Mr. Governor, was one that related to the use of lethal weapons in one of our prisons where someone was shot and killed. And so this transition to non-lethal makes perfect sense and you could have stopped when you said constitutionally viable. That is the test. And if it is not constitutionally viable, I don't care what else comes behind it, then we should not be endorsing it or utilizing it. And so at the end of the day, this transition to non-lethal weaponry is going to have a cost to it. And we have to appreciate that, and we have to understand again that when the governor makes a request to pay for those types of things, we would hope that our legislative friends would adhere to that request so that we don't have concerns about this on a going forward basis. I was surprised that it was difficult for you to answer, moving on, the question about what happens with lethal weapons when people leave employ. It makes perfect sense to me that they should not be able to keep it unless they're purchasing it from them. And the answer is simple. It is returned to the agency and reissued and utilized elsewhere. So I wanted to kind of make those preparatory remarks before I delve into some of the other concerns that I have related to, for example, the Offenders Store Fund. But before I do that, I want to tender myself to the governor to see if you want me to continue here.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
All right, okay. So let me ask a couple of questions about this Offenders Store issue, because obviously Board of Prison Commissioners has heard about issues that are related, but not necessarily the same on this issue. One of the questions I have, though, is it appears to me that the Nevada revised statutes require that Offender Store Fund be, and I quote, expended for the welfare and benefit of all offenders. However, it appears that in practice, the fund shifts the burden to the inmates to pay for certain services. For example, correctional officers' salaries for visitation posts, or costs associated with video conference inmate visits. And I'm wondering if you can give us some examples of the fund being used for the welfare and benefit of all offenders rather than simply funding what appears to be operational costs. And by the way, if you don't want to answer that here, you want to give me a writing, I'm fine with that, because I have a whole list of questions that by the way,
I appreciate it.
And I'm happy to give this list to you all, and you can follow up with us, but that's one of the questions that I have.
Attorney General Ford, I'd be more than happy to provide you in writing, line item by line item, what's transpired with the storefront. I could do that later, or I can at least start addressing some of it right now, and then anything we need to respond to later, I'd be more than happy to do so.
In the interest of time, Aaron Ford speaking, why don't we do this? Can I get my questions, and then you can follow up in writing? How about that? The next question that I had related to the Offender Store Fund is, the auditor report states that some goods are provided to inmates at no charge, for example, toilet paper, toothpaste, and soap. However, the report also states that, and I quote, some basic necessities are only available for purchase by those who can afford them. And it lists, and I quote, hygiene supplies, food, and clothing as examples. So I suppose I have two questions from this. The first of which is, I'm under the impression that food and clothing are provided to inmates, and I'm curious about what hygiene supplies, food and clothing the auditors considered basic necessities that are not being supplied to inmates. That's question one. Question two from this is, can a representative from NDOC explain why those goods are not provided to the inmates free of charge?
Absolutely, thank you very much. This is Director Daniels for the record again. I will respond by allowing two of my subject matter experts. They're both up in Carson City. The first is Catherine Reynolds, and she's our acting chief for purchasing and inmate banking. And then secondly, Brad Humphreys, who's responsible as the store manager. So these areas are very specific to them. So if I could have Ms. Reynolds.
Well, before they respond, I got a third question.
Yes.
On this issue in particular. The first full paragraph of page 6 of the report has a sentence that states, quote, "In fact, prior to October 2020, NDOC deducted up to 80% of deposits and earnings credited to the offender's account as payments for restitution assessments." Obviously, again, I recall having conversations in my role in the Board of Prison Commissioners around this time frame regarding Marcy's Law, and I want to be sure that we're not conflating two separate and distinct issues here. Were the 80% deductions referenced here due to operation of the offender's store fund, or is that an effect of Marcy's Law that we've since addressed through the adoption of regulations? I'm just not entirely sure this is an offender store fund issue here and would like some clarification. So those are my 3 questions on the store.
Absolutely. Charles Daniels again, for the record. Thank you very much for your question. And I will still have Catherine Reynolds, Acting Chief of Purchasing and Inmate Banking, as well as Brad Humphreys, who is our stores manager, respond to each portion of your questions. Please go ahead.
Okay, the little red ring, there it's on now.
Okay, we're good. Catherine, for the record, Catherine Reynolds from NDOC. As far as the first question regarding clothing and food, the prison does supply all inmates with food and clothing. They are supplied clothing when they come into intake. They are supplied hygiene supplies when they come into intake, and they are supplied replacement clothing when they wear out and hygiene supplies when they need them. The only hygiene supplies that are not readily supplied are deodorant and shampoo, and I believe the female institution supplies shampoo. I'm sorry, I did not research that before this meeting. The second part of that question was, sorry, I'm a little nervous, forgive me.
It's okay, don't be nervous.
Okay.
It's not you that's on the line here, it's Director Daniels, so you're safe. I'm just kidding, I'm kidding.
And actually, I think some of the questions are for the auditors, actually, more than the Department of Corrections. But go ahead, continue, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Okay. So the other question was regarding the 80% deduction that was taken in October of 2020, or September of 2020. That 80% was taken for victim-specific restitution. After the AR was put into place that lessened that amount, all of those transactions were reversed and the inmates were given back that excessive deduction.
Okay, so for the auditors then, my follow-up would be, was that your understanding as you drafted up this audit? Because I don't want issues conflated here. Again, I think at the end of the day, the Marcy's Law issue has been addressed. I just wanted to be sure that we're not conflating issues here.
Yes, General Ford, the sworn Loman for the record. We understood that at the time, and we're not conflating issues here. And where there is the 80% in the second part, the second finding here, that's merely for historical context and the diligence of the Board of Prison Commissioners to take action to, in effect, force NDOC to take some actions that they had not yet been taking based on Senate Bill 22.
Okay, so that I'm clear then, is the issue addressed from the auditor's perspective at this point then? Or is there an issue that remains?
From the Marcy's Law and the restitution percentage from 80% to 50%, that's not an issue for us at this time.
Okay, thank you so much. And then the first question I asked was about clothing, and clearly clothing is provided. And I want to be certain the auditors understood that as part of their report as well, because I think the impression received was that clothing was not provided.
We understand that, General Ford, Warren Loman for the record, but there are other clothing items, shirts, other things that would not be, that are available through the store that we saw that would not be part of the normal distribution, if you will.
Okay, all right, thank you. Those are my 3 questions on that
Did
issue.
you get the third one answered there?
The third one was the second question I asked about.
Marcy's?
Yeah, I think they're all answered.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, no, the first one, they're gonna write me back on, which is examples of funds being used for the welfare benefits of officers rather than simply funding what appears to be operational costs.
Okay, do we have any further questions on this one from the committee?
No.
Governor,
I
this
had
is
the same
Zach Conan.
questions.
Oh, you're with us. Go ahead, Treasurer.
Thanks so much. I had a question regarding the overtime, specifically the employees who are on standby, and I guess it's probably more of a question for the department, but could be a question for the auditors. Two parts. One, now that we've seen that there's been at least 1 year where those employees on standby have not been called in for overtime, is it reasonable to assume that they won't be on standby going forward, given that the need wasn't there? And then two, I see that a lot of the overtime was in relation to internal events and travel. And I'm curious about, obviously the department feels the need to go in person for some of these events, but have you looked at if Zoom could work for some of them, or perhaps figuring out a way so that you're not using overtime hours to traverse the state?
Who wants to answer that one?
This is James Jones, Inspector General for the record. As far as standby or on call for not being called in, with the Inspector General's office responding to events or emergencies 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, there's 16 investigators. The Inspector General or a supervisor will be contacted, who will then dispatch the person appropriate for that area or the type of crime that was committed that they go out on. And then they will can give advice, send other people, do things like that. And this happens all times of the day and night. It doesn't happen during business hours. You'll get a call at 2 a.m. You're expected to answer. You pick up, and it'll be somebody that maybe you worked with 10 years ago, and they want to catch up, and you're dead asleep. But you get to the point, you get them the people that they need, and you get a response that they need. So I am expected, as well as some of my staff, to be available 24 hours a day to make sure that the institutions get the response they need in a timely manner.
For the record, this is Deputy Director. This is Deputy Director Bill Gitter. I'd like to add that we should keep in mind that over the past year, we've conducted very limited operation due to frequent COVID lockdowns for quarantine purposes, isolations, to reduce the chance of infection. The past year, 2 years, have been very restricted and limited, and because of that, our operations have been subdued, and the chance of a big incident happening and having to call in additional personnel on overtime has been very diminished in comparison to years prior, to 2020. So as we go forward and we begin lifting those restrictions and returning to more normal operations, we can probably expect incidents that will occur that will require people who are on standby to be called back in to handle those emergencies.
And this is Director Daniels, Nevada Department of Corrections, and I'm going to add to this, and I'm going to be fairly emphatic. I want to point this out. We had no plan prior to COVID. We had a very small executive team. Every single one of my executive team members were tasked with being on the road constantly, supporting the wardens, going out on site, visiting with individuals who wanted more information. There was a lot specific to quarantine, to isolation, people being sick, people being called in. On many days, we had below 50% of our operational staff to get through those days. We also had individuals, while everybody else was doing their thing at home and Zooming, our staff had to come to work, but yet they also had their children, the people they have to look after, their elderly parents. All of this happened while everything was going on, and we did not miss an episode. We were at work. People wanted to hear from their leadership. They wanted to explain the medical issues related to their personal health and the health of their family. The family members of the offenders wanted the same information. Our offenders and our staff wanted the same information. And we did all we could to be out there face to face with our staff to ensure that we gave them the attention that they needed when they felt that it was inherently unfair for them to have to deal with these issues. Now, we all signed up for it. We're sworn, we do our thing. But this was not a case of malfeasance or anyone taking advantage of vehicles. We had to get all over the state. There's several places we can't fly to. And then in addition to that, when we could fly, we had to drive because there were no flights. But never once did I decline to go out and meet with my staff anytime, anywhere, nor did my team. We've had, and hear me clearly, deputy directors working post at my facilities because there was no one left to work because of COVID. These issues regarding how we responded, my staff were heroic in how they responded. We did not miss a beat in getting out there, communicating, making a difference. And one of the reasons we didn't have that many issues with our offenders is that twice a week we met with all staff as well as every single inmate and passed the word on. We answered their tough questions. Some of you may remember when this was called coronavirus. We started gearing up at the last week of February of 2020. Ever since then, it's been nonstop. Then we'd have an outbreak. Then we'd have an issue in town. We'd have security-related issues, and we never once stopped. So for those that seem to imply that there may be something amiss, I challenge anyone to work the schedules we work. We never took time off. The only time we were gone is when we had COVID ourselves. And so please keep that in mind. There is no mysterious issue regarding what we did. We rose to the occasion, and I'm proud of my people. They did stellar work. We communicated often with the administration. And I will tell you, we got support from the health services people, from all across the land, but we mobilized and we got the job done. And some of the ways that these are written are disingenuous, in my opinion. I apologize if I've offended someone, but do not come out here trying to tell me that our staff, for some reason, we worked all this overtime and it's out of control. Those people worked their butts off. And I just want to state that for the record.
Okay, and I appreciate it, Director, and I don't want you to take the comments that were made by the auditing staff as being disrespectful. The questions by the board members are not being made in an accusatory manner. At least that's not my reading of how they're done. There's questions that need to be asked. I appreciate your team has been willing to answer them and provide us with these explanations. I fully understand, having been there side by side with you, you went through an enormous amount for 2 years with COVID. I mean, you communicated with my team. The strain that was put on NDOC is particularly difficult. We had family members that come in these meetings complaining they can't get in. We've got inmates or offenders that are complaining they can't get services. We've got your employees that are complaining that they're working too much time. You got a lot of complaints. If anybody knows how you feel, it's me. Trust me. Because I know you can't do anything right. I get that. I totally understand that. But that's not certainly the intent of this committee and not the intent of our auditors. I want you to understand. I understand your passion and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Governor. For the record, I do want to state publicly, we got enormous support from the governor's office. This was a team effort and it required all hands on deck. So I want to once again extend to you and your team my appreciation. Also to you, Attorney General Ford and your team, every step of the way. We thank you very much. But the truth has to be said. These are heroic men and women. I will not leave these folks. They paid the ultimate price for being there. Several of our staff lost their lives because of COVID. So we're all in. And I have to state that for the record.
I appreciate you doing so. You did it out. Thank you. And you could feel your passion. Do we have any more comments from any of the committee members? Anybody? Okay. Then, moving on to, those are all information. To item number 5, presentation of 6-month audit follow-up.
Thank you, Governor. For the record, Warren Lohman. We have 2 6-month follow-ups from previous audits. Both of these are good news stories. The agencies, forestry and agriculture, are moving forward, and we expect full compliance within a few months. If the committee has any questions on either one of those 6-month follow-ups, we'll take them.
Does anyone on the committee have any questions on the 6-month follow-ups?
Sorry, I should have said this on the last one.
General Ford.
Just by the way, it seems to me that shampoo and deodorant should be like essential.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure why they got to pay for that. That's just my personal view on that. I know it adds money to the
who makes
budget.
the rule about shampoo and deodorant.
At the very least, shampoo.
I just can't understand
I
why
would say at
that
the
would
very
be
least
something.
deodorant.
Yeah, me too, that's what I would say.
I'm just being
Wash your hair.
resourceful.
I don't
Wash
have
your
much
hair
hair,
and
so
I don't
shampoo
know.
thing might be okay, but anyway, I just kind of wanted to mention that
Lice
out loud.
and all sorts of things that can.
I don't know how that, if we would look at that, that would just. be
I will
great.
take a strong look at it, and I agree.
Good, thank you. Go ahead. Do we have any questions on item number 5, the 6-month follow-ups? Seeing none. Okay, move on to item number 6, presentation of annual follow-ups.
Likewise, Governor, on the annual follow-ups, these are 18 months after the original audit was presented to the committee. If the committee has any questions on these, we'll certainly entertain them. There are no major issues with any of these annual follow-ups, and we'll continue to follow them until the recommendations are fully implemented.
That'd be great. Do we have any, committee have any questions on the annual follow-ups? Anybody? Okay, moving on to item number 7, review of the annual audit plan.
Thank you, Governor Warren Lohman. For the record, you see the audit plan before you. The 3 audits are locked in for the June EBAC meeting, and we'll be working the rest and perhaps adjusting as we go forward. If the committee has any recommendations, requests, or what have you, we'll certainly entertain those at this time.
Did anyone in the committee have a question on the schedule or the plan here? Okay. Item number 8, committee members' comments. We already had the comment on deodorant and shampoo. Do we have any other committee member comments?
I do, Governor. This is Controller Byrne. I just want to give a shout out to the Department of Corrections and the director and all the personnel working there, because clearly the Department of Corrections had enormous difficulties, enormous barriers and hurdles to get over, and you did. You were successful. So I just want to say thank you for your hard work and professionalism, and hope to work with you for many years.
You're right, Controller. Believe me, they worked with the same issues I did, is who needed a vaccine, who didn't want a vaccine, who didn't want to get tested, who had to get tested, and visitors and offenders. It was a whole plethora of issues that they had to work with, and I get it. There's no winning. Appreciate it.
And if I could, just I agree with what was just said. I mean, to be sure, because something had been done in retrospect better, differently, sure, right? But y'all, we were operating on the fly and trying to figure this out. And I think a lot of this is attributable to COVID. And that's trying to figure out how to operate during that time period. Again, retrospect, hindsight's 2020. We could have done some things differently, you know, and I get that. And we want to hold you accountable for that. But we also, again, have to be considerate of the fact that this was, you know, it's just something that hadn't happened in 100 years. And it may not have happened 100 years ago in corrections, so who knows? So anyway, I want to say that out loud as well. I think we have to hold you accountable for things that could have been done differently, but at the same time recognize the difficulty that was associated with all of this over the last 2 years.
Thank you very much, Attorney General Ford and Governor Sisolak. And I didn't catch her name, and I don't have my
Controller
Byrne. Thank you very much, and I'm going to accept that on behalf of my team. I have very tremendously talented staff who fought the whole fight, and they're still fighting it when you look at all of our issues. But I'll tell you what, I'm proud of them, and I feel uncomfortable accepting it for me, but my staff certainly deserve it. So thank you. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you. And at the same time, Director Lohman, we appreciate you bringing some of this to our attention, like the on-call stuff, and that's going to be different in the endemic phase that we're entering now as it relates to COVID, and the overtime should be reduced accordingly, and some of these things we should be able to get back under control, which is what we're looking forward to. Any further committee member comments?
I just want to add a thank you on behalf of myself and our state. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for mobilizing your folks. There was no manual for the pandemic, as we all know, and so we really appreciate your leadership.
Thank you very much, and once again, on behalf of my staff, I accept it. And once again, though, we're just part of a larger team, which is of the executive branch and, of course, of Governor Sisolak. So thank you, sir, for your leadership.
I'm going to close committee member comments and go on to public comment. This is the second time we have set aside for public comment. Anyone wishing to address the board on any item under the purview of this committee, please step forward, identify yourself for the record. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. Do we have anybody in Las Vegas for the public comment section? Randy, did I see your hand go up?
I thought you meant my Randy.
No, I thought my Randy had her hand. Adjusting her hair or something. Any public comments up north?
No, Governor.
Any public comments, written or electronic?
No, Governor.
Okay, that being said, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.